Remember Zach Messler from season 1, episode 12?
The whiskey guy?
The messaging guy.
Boom shakalaka. Same guy. You know what's worse than bad whiskey?
Bad messaging.
And what do they have in common?
They burn.
But our friend Zach knows something special.
How to make both go down smooth.
Every Wednesday, he hosts free clarity rule sessions.
45 minutes, just you and Zach.
Getting your message crystal clear.
So you attract more of your ideal customers.
Head to cloudyrules.com and book your slot.
Because life's too short for bad messaging.
Mm-hmm. We are a podcast for product marketers and B2B SaaS who feel misunderstood of what they do.
From someone who truly gets what you do. And
basically help you feel less like a misfit, being unignorable in your role.
Welcome to another episode of We're Not Marketers. Before we introduce our special guest for this episode, this is Zach, the sales water boy, passing it over to Gab, recently promoted.
Yeah, I'm the sales deck assistant, executive.
Last time we checked was associate, but we can check with pickup truck. We can check up with pickup truck on your title.
Yeah, pickup truck. Gab Bugeaud, sales deck associate. Still doing sales deck. I'll pass it out to my co-host Eric.
Yeah, and season 3 of being the Frankenmeister here, Eric Holland and Zach. Could you do the honors and let everyone know who our special guest of the day is?
Our special guests are our first new hire, pickup truck.
No one wants to.
No one
wants to meet pickup truck.
We're not here to talk about pickup truck, our operations manager, but y'all can argue on LinkedIn. Is he the better half of Fletch PMM? Rob Kaminski. He is a generalist maverick. Earlier in this conversation, he went from different professions. He went from marketing, sales, product. You see his content on LinkedIn talking about from positioning specifically on homepage messaging. Really excited to be speaking with him because we'd love to hear his point of view of our product marketers. How do we best position product marketing? And what is it like working as not a fractional solo PMM, but a fractional PMM duo of Fletch? Oh, Rob, how's it going, my friend?
It's going great. I'm pumped to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
No, we excited. We were talking before this conversation where I was like, Rob, you got the best radio voice, I have to say, arguably of all our guests. So we appreciate you teaching us a thing or two and just in that quick moment right there.
Wow. That's a hard bar to live up to, but I guess we got 30 minutes here to be my audition for my radio jockey career that's coming next.
Another notch on your LinkedIn profile. By the way, you guys better look this up. This guy the only thing he hasn't done is the Iron Man. Unless you have, and you haven't put it on your LinkedIn because you're being modded.
I think that ship has sailed. It was on the list a while back, but I'm 5 or 6 knee surgeries deep, so I think that dream is dead.
Oh, I felt that in my right knee specifically. But hey, Rob, we got one question that we think is more important than any other. We make sure it's the kickoff for every show. So, Gab, I'm going to let you do the honors as usual.
Well, before you do ask this question, Rob, we just want to check in with you first that Anthony's on the other side of the mic, just kind of holding up a homepage hostage, being like, you better know the answer.
Yeah, he's right here in front of me, just hanging out. No, it'll be interesting for you guys to actually get your perspective on the differences and similarities of Anthony and I. We've been at this a few years now, and I think we view ourselves as kind of versions of the same person. We share a lot of similar perspectives, but yet we don't agree on everything. And so this is going to be an interesting litmus test for you and your audience to, make your assessment. And there was even a running joke from Taz Bober, one of our friends who's in the space. She didn't believe that we were actually two people. She was convinced that one of us was AI, and we would go to trade shows, and she's like, send me a picture to prove it. And we finally were sending pictures, and she's like, all right, they're actually two different people.
I'm excited. Let's go for it.
Doing sales deck and asking this question. Rob, are product marketers actually marketers? Why or why not?
Well, at the risk of ruining our budding friendship here, my answer is that they definitely are marketers. And sorry guys. Here's the why. And keep in mind, the context for us is we work in startup companies. So early stage all the way to like B and C round. And my view of this is if you're a product marketer just doing the strategy side of product marketing, you're a pretty shitty product marketer in that context. And so there may be an answer or a world where product marketers aren't actually marketers, but to me, it's a cop out on the execution. And I say this with a bit of like almost embarrassment because I think for a long while I was that strategy only guy. I just wanted to do the strategy and only work on the strategy. And I think anyone who's like starting to progress in their career probably has that feeling of like, oh, I've seen this. I don't want to do this anymore. I want a team. I want to work on the strategy, the big picture stuff. And the further along I've gotten in my career, I've realized that strategy, while incredibly important, is really just a small piece of it. And so I think execution fuels the strategy in a lot of ways. And you got to be willing to roll up your sleeves and get the work done. And I think for product marketers out there, that means like doing the pitch, like pretend to be the salesperson, pretend to be the content marketer, know how to run an ad. Like every little bit that you do that, not only will your product marketing fundamentals get better, but you'll earn trust with the people that you need to influence, especially internally, to take your strategies that you're developing as a product marketer and make them real. And so that's where I'm at with product marketers being marketers.
Was there a specific experience you had that made you shift from I want to do strategy only to being like the perspective you shared now?
I would say it's a collection of experiences. Like the one story that sort of stands out to me in my career, I was in sales, and so I was an AE, was a sales engineer that became an AE, and then really found myself in a product marketing role. We were trying to roll out vertical specific products, and it's more the contrast between I had a peer, right? So I was working on a vertical. It was integrated resorts and casinos was kind of this like sub product we were going to launch as part of this like platform company. And I had a peer product marketer who was in charge of, I want to say it was like internal comms or HR was kind of their vertical. I can't remember it exactly. They struggled on every decision, every asset, every part of the like program to actually roll out a verticalized go-to-market plan and really sub positioning for these products. And only now can I really see why. I had been an AE and a sales rep. And so when I'm putting together these programs, I had the trust of the reps. I had the trust of the directors. The product people trust me because I also came from product. And so all that context let me do a better job. And it's like, you have to be willing, or at least understanding the empathy, what it takes to do the other roles that are going to be the outputs of your strategy work, where it's like, that to me was like, okay, strategy and execution have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think
I
if
love
you're not
it.
willing to do any execution, you're a shitty product marketer. 1,000%. We agree in that regard.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
But I go ahead. Sorry, I don't
No,
want to
you're
cut
good,
you.
Gab. I could just feel a sense of wisdom coming off your lips there, so I don't want to interrupt.
We'll see, but
It's the
I
mustache. It's
think
the
that
mustache.
yeah,
Every
exactly.
week.
I hope I don't f this up. But you said something very interesting, Rob, in terms of we always have that kind of always kind of attracted to strategy. At least I was when I started my marketing career because you're so knees deep into execution, into multiple things that you see the impact it has, you see the cool stuff, you see all of the kind of outcomes it can bring. But too much strategy is definitely something that at least for PMMs in early stage startup can definitely go very much wrong. But do you feel the same when you're in a situation when it's not early stage startups? We talk about a Series B company or an enterprise, and you're a PMM that still has a lot to do in terms of like execution, but sometimes has to rely more on alignment and strategy. Do you feel that point of view would change in those circumstances?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The short version for me is I don't think so. So like I'll tap into my experiences at Oracle doing product marketing work. My experience there for a company that's already insanely successful, a lot of the strategy has been sussed out, or the majority of it, right? And it doesn't mean that there's not nuances to how you approach different things. It kind of depends what initiatives and programs you're on. But most of the work is execution. Now, the caveat where I would tempt to answer your question with yes is where the strategy comes into play more at those later stage companies is internal alignment. And I'm sure we'll go deeper into this at Oracle. That's where I spent most of my time as a strategist, was figuring out how to garner internal stakeholders' influence and support just to get out of our way to actually execute. But I don't see that the same as the actual work a product marketer does to align positioning, messaging, go to market, and all those pieces. And so in general, I think the bigger the company, the more a marketer you become. And even you guys, the way you kind of playfully joke at it, I don't know too much about your work situations, but like, sounds like you're in the tactics of like, I've been put into this area. And I think you're going to see that a lot as companies already have success and they kind of know what they need. And so they're trying to optimize some of those tactical deliverables across the board rather than reinventing the wheel on the strategy.
Tell us more about that internal influence piece, because that's been a common piece of feedback we've heard from the PMM community, is that I'm being tasked with the tactical work, but when I want to give a point of view, it's kind of like, don't come back until you write that one pager.
It's, oh man, it is the hardest thing. And it's so funny, me just being really self-aware about the work that Anthony and I are doing now. We have built our business to basically avoid that really important piece. But we just tell the founders that come to us point blank, especially the larger companies. You get a company that's like Series B, Series C. This is a common thing that'll happen. A head of marketing or CMO will come to us and they'll be like, our positioning's all over the place. My founder wants to do something, product wants to do something else. Like, we really need to sort this out. And we caution them in a couple areas. We're like, well, you got to bring all these people into the room. And just so you know, like, we're not a change agent. Like, we're not going to like, we will be proctoring and facilitating this conversation and giving you our recommendations. There's an extremely high chance someone's going to hate what we say. And so we kind of push it back on them to garner the alignment. And so, like, selfishly, we've been able to sidestep this thing that's like super critical and super important just in the work we do, and only focus, ironically enough, on the strategy and then a bit of the execution on the homepage side. And so, like, I'm probably not the best person today to have like the modern way of doing that. In my past career, so like going back 5 years, that's where it just comes that generalist nature. And you start to get into things of just empathy and asking questions. There's a book called Crucial Conversations that I recommend everybody read. And it's just being willing to be vulnerable and open. And that it's kind of interesting. You have to almost trick all those other people into thinking that it's their idea. So you have to kind of eliminate your ego when you're doing this. And it's kind of a mental jujitsu that you have to do. And it pisses me off, to be candid, that a lot of companies have to do this to do good work. It's probably why we built the business that we have right now. And so I love the question. Those are kind of my like couple things that I would lean into, but I'm far away not the best person to like, yeah, how do you in a 200 person org get everybody marching in the same direction? It's like, that's a war of time that you just have to be consistent and really build trust and relationships across the board, much like doing enterprise sales and like garnering support from the different departments.
I think this is spot on, and it's exactly why so many great ideas and bold ideas don't see the light of day. And we're like, oh, like for example, with messaging or positioning, it's like, well, let's have a good enough version that kind of please everyone, but ultimately feels super boring and very generic. And then there's one competitor that will decide to be more bold and just, step on a few toes to get something live. And then what's happened is the rest of the market copy them because, it looks good. We see that it works, but we're not determined to do something as bold as this a few years back.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing it kind of like strikes me is, and maybe a shameless plug, but bringing in an outside voice to shake loose those conversations can be incredibly powerful, because there's this interesting thing about being employed versus also then setting the direction at a strategy level, not being a founder who has equity, is you say enough, but then you also have to protect your job in a lot of ways. And like, it's natural for people to do this. Like, we have to, take care of our families and all of this stuff. And so I'll never forget, especially some of our larger projects where marketing brings us in. This one in general, they were a Series C, they raised a boatload of money. The CMO brought us in, and I'll never forget her phrasing. She's like, those workshops were the biggest shit shows I've ever been a part of, and they were amazing because it was just us basically, again, no skin in the game, really telling this founder what we saw that happened to align to what the CMO saw. And it was shaking his foundation for like, oh shit, have I been thinking about things the wrong way? And so we gave this woman an opening to finally have that influence just by bringing in an outside voice. And so that's another thing that could be powerful, is like, use the resources you have to like, hit the messaging from a different angle internally. It can definitely help to move things along.
100%. So, and I feel like, I don't know about Zach or Eric, but I'm seeing it when I talk to prospect and with clients. Like you just come in. Sometimes, there's already PMMs on the team, but just the way you're kind of approaching it means that I have a different perspective. Just what you guys, I think you work with over like 150 companies and counting. So we're seeing that perspective, we're seeing that expertise. And again, you have no skin in the game. So it's not like, if I see something wrong, my job's on the line. No, if I see something wrong and you don't agree with it, well, there's a thousand of other people in thought leader that could just tell it straight to your face.
100%.
Yeah, I swear, Rob, you read my mind, because I was literally about to ask you that question based off, I talked to someone at Drive, actually used your services, and I asked the very specific question: was the value in the work, or was the value in having someone completely removed from the business come in and tell them how it is? And they were like, the latter, 100%. Like that was the value, was getting them to like get everyone to realize what needed to get done so you could reach your goals that you were trying to get from the positioning perspective. And so with that, I find that interesting how you said it pisses you off how all that stuff needs to get done. But that seems to be like the inherent real value that you're bringing in every single conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, now I'm curious who the customer is. We'll have to take that offline.
How was that value for you versus, and they're like 100%, you get that value no matter what the outcome is. Now you can actually do real work and get the outcome you're trying to do. Super cool.
In this case, it's interesting. I don't want to go too rogue, but I know we're going to talk about it. That tension between the value being kind of the positioning smoke test, we'll sometimes call it, versus the other part of our service being the homepage copy as a deliverable. That's been tricky to juggle for us a bit, because there are folks that come in like they just wanted to be challenged, like, hey, really tell us like what's right, what's wrong, argue this out with us. Clearly that's where the value lied. The copy part for them was a bit more of a struggle, right? And so like we've had this interesting thing of like, what are we optimizing for? Are we optimizing for the positioning strategy component, or are we optimizing for the best homepage copy you could ever have? And we obviously see positioning through the homepage as like a great litmus test of like how clear can you be with your positioning. But it's been tough business wise to support that, because we literally had to do a whole diagnostic in our business, like who's coming to us for positioning, who's coming to us for copy, and it's mixed. And so now we've made some changes where we have copywriters in place now that do a good job. But for the longest time, we used to just say, oh, we throw the homepage in for free. Like, not that it's an afterthought, but like you're here to suss out these really hard questions that you have to answer. We'll get into the homepage, but like, you're going to rewrite that 100 times so nobody cares. Well, that ended up being a detriment. And in fact, like part of our origin story, our first 25 projects, nothing to do with homepage. It was purely positioning and messaging. And we'd go through these workshops. It's very similar to the way we do it now. We'd fill out our positioning and messaging, basically messaging house, positioning strategy doc, call it what you want. And the founders would go, this was freaking amazing. Like, I finally have the clarity I need. I know what I'm going to say. And we're like, yes. And then they'd go, but what do I do? We're like, well, what do you mean? Like, well, what do I do next? We're like, go market, like go build a sales deck, go build a website, run ads, like create content, like be out there like preaching around the problem that you solve. And like these founders were stuck, and we're like, shit, what do we do? They feel like they loved it, but they hated it at the same time. They feel like they didn't get anything. And so this was a decision we had to make, Anthony and I, really early on. We're like, we need to give them something. And naturally it was like we were already kind of leaning that way, but we could have picked almost any asset that they had to do. We could create campaigns, we could do sales decks. We chose homepage. I'll call it at the now strategically because it makes sense. But at the time, it was sort of a dart throw of like, where could this thing live in a way that matters? And it helped us sort of shape our whole point of view on purpose of homepages, and really even just the process of writing a homepage.
Well, I love how you guys view it too. And I've actually done this week and just sent out another test on good old Winter today. But nice. I'm specifically going after that above the fold message and want to see what that's like instead of giving them a messaging doc to rip apart. I'd rather see what is that impact, and are they going to actually, is that going to translate to them ultimately wanting to know more, hitting the demo button? So I think your deliverable that you guys picked was super savvy, and I've learned a lot of it and apply it like literally this week. So Love it.
Love to hear it.
Take us more.
I'm curious about that.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry.
Go for it.
I'm curious about what you said in terms of you had to take a decision, use your point of view to kind of put that. Before Fletch, you were a director of PMM at Headway, and I think Anthony as well. And I'm not sure about exactly the specific, but my understanding was it was about creating a new offer for Headway.
Yeah.
What was the ecosystem around it? Because my understanding is that you spent like 9 months just researching, just very much trying to find how do we tackle that positioning and messaging.
Yeah. Well, in reflection, we had no idea we were going to get into positioning and messaging. And so to tee up the context, Anthony and I met at a digital product studio, basically think full service agency that works just with primarily early stage startups, but also large corporate innovation groups that are launching new products. And we were part of the product strategy group. And so we were getting deployed mainly as like fractional product leaders. So it was huge surface area. Build the product, design the product, take it to market, figure out what the hell you're going to say. Like it just kind of depends on like what people were struggling with, and we'd fill that gap. And so super broad. And what the research that you're alluding to, which 9 months. I mean, I was there a few years. So it was for me kind of ongoing for a while. Was like, how do you sell the service that is product in general? And it's very strategy oriented. It's like, how do you sell strategy? How do you sell product strategy? And what we found is it's too broad to market. It's too broad to position. And so we're like, well, shit, what can we do? And so our experimentation was, we knew we had to get specific. And the two levers to pull are get specific on the who, industry, vertical, whoever we're doing it for, or get specific on the actual tactical stuff you do. And so we started just like a kid playing with a toy, playing with the levers. Like, one day we're in fintech, the next day we're in headless CMS, one day we're selling sales decks, and we were just kind of like squirming around for a while, while also experimenting across channels, cold DMs, LinkedIn social, and honestly, it was built on LinkedIn primarily. Like that's kind of a funny story. Is Anthony, who has a big background in content, he calls it accidentally went viral on his first post. Two things: it wasn't accidental, and it was his second post, and so he's just a liar on that one, just point blank. And so like this happened, and I'm like, well, how damn, like a lot of attention. I'm like, I could do that, and to me, that was almost like the kicker of like start publishing. I had a lot to say. I've been like through a lot in my career previously, but I never published anything, and so that set Anthony and I on this like almost internal competition battle of like who could get the most attention on LinkedIn. But we started super broad. We were like product, and we were talking about anything that we found interesting related to the work we're doing. And as we were doing that, we were just looking at thousands of startup homepages, mostly for prospecting purposes. Like these are the companies we were trying to sell to. And like we were developing our thesis on good positioning. How do you sell strategy in like broad, basically horizontal services, while simultaneously bumping into this problem of like, I can't tell what the hell any of these companies do. So like we were having trouble personalizing our message. Like I can't figure out what anyone does. It's like, is this a thing? And that's where Anthony and I really started to collaborate like daily, like really aggressively, spending a ton of time just talking through this stuff, sharing insights. And that's where it started. And it just kind of like hurricaned around us spending 12 hours on the phone for the next 3 years, getting more and more specific. And we found our way, basically product strategy. We realized no one could explain themselves, and we started leaning into that. And we're like, oh, this is like formally, this is product marketing, this is positioning and messaging. And so we went deeper, and we just kept going deeper, narrow, even going down to being like product positioning for early stage PLG products. I think was probably our most narrow positioning that we had, but all through experimentation. We were basically using LinkedIn to test out, does this market exist? Do people actually have this problem? And I'll pause there because then there's a bunch more context of like how we actually started shaping the service and the frameworks. But that's like the origin story of sorts of how we actually got on this track.
Going back to, you mentioned something that for a lot of people starting in their fractional career is their ears going to pick up. First 25 clients, many of like myself included are like, oh, like back in the day, I'm like, I want to get to my first 5.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear more about like, what did you all like start doing to reach to that number? And then the second part of the question is, looking back at that origin, what did you all stop doing at this current place? So I'm curious, like, what did you start doing to like get to that volume, and kind of like, what is
Yep.
one takeaway that you're like, oh, we probably wouldn't do that again?
Yeah. I love this question for so many reasons. It's very timely as well. My wife is basically trying to replicate our process on LinkedIn for a very different niche. And just today, she started to get her first like calls from what she's doing through a content lens. And so before I get into all that, the key piece for folks who want to go fractional, what they have to realize is that the service and what you're going to sell and how much you're going to sell it almost doesn't matter at all. Your first thing you have to solve for is attention and interactions. And so it involves making some sort of a choice of like, who do you want to help? And like, you should loosely have a sense of what you're going to help them with, but then it should just be like, how do I get them in a room like this? That's all Anthony and I were doing in the first 6-9 months. Make a ton of noise, wait for signal in the form of comments and people reaching out, and turn those into meetings. That was literally it. We didn't have a whole L slot like beyond that. So like, I'll never forget. This was like such a fun time, super stressful, but we found a way through our content to basically just get meetings with founders. They would see a content and they'd be like, wow, that's interesting. I think you can help me. Great, let's talk. We didn't have a service. We didn't know what we were doing. And so we'd get on these calls. Imagine me and Anthony, we were probably taking 15 to 20 each a week, just as we were really starting to like ramp up. But in the early days, it was like, great, I got 2 calls this week. And we were just like, let's just replicate that. More content. And in each of these calls, we'd spend the first half listening, usually talking about our post. Why did it trigger it? And then the second half, making shit up. Oh, yeah, we could solve that. Oh, you have a pricing problem? Oh, well, imagine that. We have a pricing service we could take you through. And like, we would pitch it on the fly. And really just to gauge like, okay, there's a market problem and I'm going to go fulfill that demand. And then people started buying and it was like, shit, they bought it. And so Anthony and I would get on the phone, outline the service, and they'd be like, all right, we're just going to go do it. That was it. And so there wasn't like, I think where people get really stuck, especially ones who've had, like you've had a good career, you've got these frameworks, you have to realize that all those frameworks you have aren't baked into a service. Like you were doing them for companies, right? So like your customers didn't have to go through a buying process and it really wasn't even a workflow. It's just like, you know how to write a sales deck. Great. You have to turn that into a product, which means steps, which means guidelines, which means like clarity around what you're going to get. And so we're just making that up on the fly. And so if I back all the way up, solve for attention, solve for reps, number one, and you're going to suck, and do it for free if you have to. There was a time where if you look at our LinkedIn content early on, we were just auditing homepages and posting them. Like nobody asked us to do that. We also were DMing them to the people we do them for. So call that like ABM, before we even have a service. We're just like, hey, 5 minutes, I looked at your site, this is what I see, this is what I think your problems are. I thought you might think this is useful, and then ask for nothing. And we'd always get meetings though, because we were just trying to learn what did they think the problem is? It doesn't matter what we think the problem is. And so solve for reps, solve for interactions, and our service and our frameworks are nothing more than an output of probably now thousands of calls with founders, where we just shaped the world of what they struggle with, how they want to buy. You layer on the 300 projects we have, and it was just like this nonstop iteration loop. And so we treat our service like an open source software, constantly making changes, adding release notes as we tweak it. But that's the what to do. And then I'll pause there and we'll come back to like, what did we stop doing out of the service company previously?
Yeah, that's so cool. And I have a question for the folks out there with a partner, right? So how did you navigate that world of experimentation and trying stuff out and not having obviously the security of kicking ass that you guys are doing now? What was that like?
What do you mean specifically there? It's like, what
were you,
would I
guess I want to start did you have a full-time job while you guys were trying to figure this out? Or did you jump into it and say, we'll figure it out?
So mostly the second. So here's what's unique about our situation. We kind of had this overlap of solve the company we were at's problem around go-to-market and positioning their broad set of services. But the LinkedIn stuff is all through us, right? And so like, it's probably a whole story there, but we built the service for this other company effectively. And we just got to this point where, to be honest, there was just sort of this like separation. They were like, what are you going to do? Hundreds of these a year? And we're like, yeah, why not? because they were trying to sell, remember, like any agency, they're trying to sell 50K, 100K. They have a dev team, they have a design team. And so they couldn't see, how does this connect into upselling other things? Because the other thing I sort of like glossed over is technically our first service was audits that we were selling for $500, right? And so we progressed into this like done with you type of service. But we built it kind of inside this other company. And so maybe our first, I don't know, maybe 10 clients were on their paper and we didn't make a dime on it. It was like us building it. But we got to this point where, again, because of the way we built it open source, there's no IP. We shared everything publicly. The distribution was all direct through our LinkedIn profiles. We then had a very honest conversation with our founders of this service agency. We're like, hey, we think we're going to just go build this on our own. Like, we could build it here, but it doesn't really make sense. Like, do you agree? And those were awkward and interesting, but we safely built it inside. And then when we spun out, I mean, we were doing 40, 50K a month by the time we spun out of that company. And so our story is a little bit maybe not unique, where there was this like big stopgap of building. But and then I'll pause there, and then we'll get into probably the partner co-founder thing with me and Anthony and how that
That's amazing, because I think it's a rare situation, but at the same time, it's follow up, like some good guidance of like try to make it expand before necessarily jumping like in an emptiness and hoping things sticks. Like, you had the opportunity of trying stuff out, but also of trying to make it linked. And then you saw, well, there's a problem, it's disjointed, but let's go all in.
Yeah.
And going all in at like 40, 50K a month, I think is better than a lot of fractional PMMs out there. So yeah, it's awesome.
And I got to give credit to the company we were in. Like, the context was unique because the team we were on was literally hired to be the most entrepreneurial team in the company. To the point where we were almost like I said, fractional product. We were almost entrepreneurs in residence for the companies we would drop into. And so there was open dialogue. I've been there a few years of like, hey, they knew I was going to go start my own thing at some point. Like, what does it look like? No one knows. Is it software? Is it services? No idea. But my boss was basically the CEO and COO of the company. And I was like very honest with them of like, how do I get into more an entrepreneurial thing? So they were very supportive. And I think the hard reality for a lot of folks trying to do fractionals, they might not have that. And so they might have to create the separation. My guidance there is like, have the conversation, be upfront, and then be really aggressive with your time. And so there was a point I remember early on when I was doing the publishing on LinkedIn, mostly, I framed it to them. I'm like, hey, I'm going to start publishing on LinkedIn. These are my nights and weekends. Just know that. There's overlap in our work. And so hopefully it'll benefit you guys, but this is me trying something else. And they were very supportive. That's probably what I would recommend to folks who are worried about like building while they're in a place. Like, you do need some set of approvals, and you just need to be open about what you want and also like what the rules are, right? Like, because we were so open and we knew the rules, it was like we weren't breaking any rules. It was just more of this awkwardness of like, hey, we built this whole thing, we built it on our own, we don't really need you guys anymore. And yeah, we were able to kind of navigate those conversations.
Going back to what you all stopped doing from the first 25.
Honestly, the stop had to do with focus. And so every time we sat down, basically the founders and this chief executive level of the agency we were in, we would tell them what they could do to carve out their space and create repeatability in their marketing programs. There was just lack of a willingness to do it. And so it was one of those things where when we were doing the experimentation, like, the project was ours. And so it was a safe space. Like, hey, we're out here testing. And so we're going to go run at this for 2 to 3 months. We didn't need anyone's permission to temporarily just be the hyper-specific people. And so like one of the stories of hyper-specific is is kind of an interesting case study for folks really trying to get started, even in fractional. I did this with a colleague. This worked twice at the same time. So a different colleague, he's fantastic. He went on to take a huge product management role at Microsoft after leaving the company, but we verticalized. And so for 6 weeks, it was literally, we joked around. My colleague, his name's Eirik. He's like, you should just do headless CMS companies. And he was going to go do data scraping companies. And so what we did, we basically built a list. He built a list of data companies. I built a list of headless CMS companies. I put it in Airtable, and I was just gathering data, scraping data from all these different pieces, number of employees, size. I was reading their headline on their homepage. And then I had the list. It was like 300 companies. I would cold DM it to every founder and executive at these companies on LinkedIn and just say, hey, putting together this report. I see you're in the space. Thought you might find it interesting. I could get a meeting. I was getting 80% meetings. It's not even just like acceptance rates. It's like, you just send it. Here's value for free. Thought you might find it interesting. And then I started taking these calls, and I probably had 30 calls in the first 4 weeks with these leaders. The first few were very awkward because I knew nothing about the space other than what I read in blogs and my research and putting together the list. But by the time you leave each meeting, you're like starting to stand on the shoulders of giants. And so by the end of the 5th meeting, I had like a founder, VP of marketing, CMO level understanding of how the headless CMS space works. And I started to build a market map of like who's doing what specifically. And people then found out about it. And I was just cold DMing. I didn't do anything on social. I got invited to speak on a panel of experts for headless CMS like 4 weeks into this thing. Literally did the presentation and had people then emailing me of like, hey, potential client, I think you can help us. And so like, that's just an example of, I guess, what we stopped doing, but then started doing in this. And anybody can do that playbook, right? And I know we're going to talk about niching down. Like I niched down to an industry that had 250 companies in it. If I wanted to do fractional and start to make a name and get my first clients, go do that. Because in 6 weeks, I was a headless CMS sort of pseudo expert in the market. And these founders would then be like, what can you do for me? And to be honest, at the time, that's where I fell down because we didn't have a service. And so it was that like made up pitching that if I wanted to keep doing that, I would have just did more and more reps. But specificity works. And so that was the thing that we stopped doing, even though it's more like we started doing that because we weren't before.
That's a course in itself. So in like a 6-week span, you went from identifying an industry, headless CMS, then you had a list of companies you put up in the Airtable, and then you started pulling market data. And it sounds like you were building a report in public and then using that as a lead magnet to kickstart these conversations with individuals. And it sounds like there's a missing piece. I mean, were they talking amongst themselves? And then is that how your name got around? Or was it just like...
There was a little bit of that.
Yeah.
If I were to do it over again, I would have done it more publicly, just doing it through DMs. What happened is I would like name drop. Oh, I spoke to these guys. I spoke to that woman. Great. And so they all kind of knew each other. And then one of the people who I reached out to happened to be he ran a CMS expert panel group. Literally, he's like, he hosts executives in CMS. He was like, hey, this founder sent me this report you sent him. He's like, we should talk. And we talked. And he's like, oh, you got to come present. And I'm like, great. And again, it's like a little awkward because you would have asked me 5 weeks previous, what's headless CMS? I'd be like, oh, don't they do something with like building websites or something? Like I wouldn't really have known. Where like now I can tell you all the players and who's big, who's small, who's new in the market, who raised money, all those pieces just from putting together that list.
Such an awesome tactic, and I'm sure our listeners will be delighted. I wanted to go back to Eric's question related to, and after that we can cover niching down, but what's your relationship with a partner that, you know, you two have skin in the games, you have been growing your business? You said sometimes you guys are very much alike, but sometimes you disagree. What's your feel on it?
This is something, just to me, going on this experience with Anthony has been like incredible, to the point where I have no idea how solopreneurs do it. Just being candid, like even founders, solo founders, you're maniacs, right? Like if I would have gone alone, there's no way I would have had the success that we're having, and Anthony would definitely share the same thing. And so this is something I will look for in all endeavors, and like there's a good chance that Anthony and I will build more businesses together or just continue doing this thing for a long time. As far as it's so funny, I tell all the founders I meet with, or aspiring founders, this, and fractional people, how to find them. Man, how do you find your wife? Like that's kind of what it was like. And so I feel really lucky where like Anthony and I just sort of accidentally bumped into each other. The things that I will say for folks is prioritize trust and communication alignment more than anything else. My absolute favorite thing, and I think it's what makes Anthony and I run and makes Fletch run, and not everyone really knows this, we love to debate and argue. And so like it's the bedrock of how we've made all the decisions in our business. And we've got a couple like short heuristics for it. It's like, and this isn't kind of a new thing, so hopefully folks are leaning into this, but for us, if we're making a big decision, it has to be a hell yeah that we both agree with. And that's a big one. And we will constantly take the stance of like argue against it. And we will basically host these debates that go on daily and hourly. And our wives, it's hilarious, they think we're pissed at each other. And Anthony and I, to this date, like we've never had a bad moment where like I'll get off the call and my wife will be like, you guys okay? And I'll be like, yeah, it was a great session, like so good. And like his wife's exactly the same. It's just because we're pretty violent, pretty aggressive, like in the way we debate, but it's all for learning. And we have the view that like the best argument wins, point blank, period. And being willing to then be like, yeah, you're right. I think I was wrong. You're right. Let's do your thing. That is like the bedrock of how we roll. And I think all co-founders should have that. The last little silly thing that I'll share too is when it comes to smaller decisions, we also have this thing, and I'll give Anthony credit. The big baby wins. And so if we recently were updating kind of our positioning and our copy, and we don't agree on everything. And so like there was a point where it's like, no, it should say this, it should say this. And it's like, it's a detail that we were covering. And so we get to the point where someone's finally like, are you the big baby on this? And it's like, whoever has the most passion behind the small thing and what it should be, let's just do that. And so that's another thing that lets us just move super fast that maybe is a little bit unique. At least Anthony taught me that one.
I think that
it's very inspiring.
Yes.
And it's giving me good inspiration, because I feel like we're doing something similar with the pod. Like we have ideas, but it's often like Zach that comes in and he's like criticizing us, but I'm always coming up.
Yeah.
And I'm not throwing shade, but
Yes.
I feel like every time you do that, we come up with like better
Yeah.
results.
Yeah.
Because and it's not that Eric and I are yes men, but Eric is like has a crazy idea. I'm like, let's go, let's do it. And then Zach is like, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
That?
Yeah.
And it's always kind of pushing us back to. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you, Zach. Just wanted to kind of bring that to the
I've
light.
been
You got to be able to
bestowed-
do public. And so like we are literally trying to be the worst boss you could face to
Yes.
defend your idea, so that when it goes public, like cakewalk in front of customers,
Yes.
great, this will be easy, like no problem.
We've already got all the objections. I don't know if we came over, I came over it, but I got the CFO title for the reason within We're Not Markers, because I'm just. I got a question.
He's the no guy.
I'm the question guy, and also the no guy.
Yeah. The risk is paralysis, like analysis paralysis. Another thing is finding ways to create forcing functions to do things is really important. It's something we all often talk about. And even my story of like, how did we build the service? Well, I sold it. So guess what? We got to build it now. And so making some of those choices when you can just forces the decision making. And it's one of those weird things, it's like, oh, I got to write a paper. I've got 3 weeks to do it. Can't do it in 3 weeks, but suddenly I can do it in the 90 minutes right before, because it's like all that urgency drives it. So you're also trying to create that as much, or at least that's what I would encourage you guys to do, is like argue about it, but then find ways to create those artificial deadlines.
All right, guys.
I wanna
That's the part of the conversation I needed today.
I want to
I'm ready to go run through a wall.
Let's go.
Let's go, baby.
You don't want to do that. Like hospital waits these days now. I'm like, oh yeah, I do. When I was in Vermont, my elbow swelled like the size of a tennis ball. Vermont has an amazing healthcare system, by the way. I was in there for like a few hours. I had like bursitis. It was just inflammation of the elbow. But
Okay.
that's the context of what we're talking about.
Nice.
So,
Don't send me
Rob,
down a rabbit hole of U.S. healthcare. You're going to hear like a terrible rant. So pull us another direction.
hey, we're here for old Gabs in Canada, so he's like suckers.
Oh,
Like,
man. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. We wait a long time though. It's free, but I hope you have your next days off, because you'll wait a long time.
No. There you go.
So, Rob, going back to the market map, because that's my first time hearing that like terminology. If I'm a fractional PMM listening to this conversation right now, I am like, I would like to do that. Like, I'm curious, like what does that look like? What are the steps you got to take to build something like that?
Yeah. I think the big thing is decide what you want to do. So like, if I sidestep the market map for a moment, when we were trying to get into messaging, we just worked on messaging. We were auditing messaging, we were writing messaging, and we were sharing it openly, right? And so it's like finding a way to force create those reps is really, really important. And you don't need anyone's permission to do that. And so I get this question a lot. People will DM me and be like, hey, I'm trying to, and this isn't even for fractional. They're like, I'm trying to get a PMM job. What do I do? And I'm just like, well, what kind of PMM work do you want to do? And this gets into that hard thing. PMMs are generalists. So it's like, what do you want to be really good at? Do you want to be really good at the competitive intel? You want to be really good at sales decks? You want to be really good at sales enablement? Like, it's like, okay, pick that thing. And that's the hardest thing, is like, no one wants to pick, no one knows what to pick. And I'll actually circle back to that because it's important. But once you pick, go do it. Like, go find a role that says, oh yeah, you'll be helping figure out how to, go to market against competitors. Great. Who is that? Oh, it's Nike. Great. Go put a list of all their competitors and send it to their whole marketing department, and don't ask for anything. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to get a meeting, maybe even a job, likely a job. Like, if you keep doing that. And what you don't realize is you're building a portfolio. Too many people think that their portfolio needs to be blessed by a boss, and that's just bullshit. It's like, go do the work. And not only, it's like, it's so powerful, because any leader, any manager of people in general, or if someone owns a business, of course they want talented people, but they want you to take initiative. It's like, what better way than like, yeah, this guy just started doing the work and he sent it to me. It's like, get that guy a job. Like, you're just going to make it so easy for them. And so that's really the thing, is just like, figure out what to do and start doing it. And so like the market map component, we were trying to sell product strategy. And so like, how do we do that? Well, we started looking at all the products, and like, that's where our market map, and you could slice these all a bunch of different ways. We were slicing them by, what does the product do? What are the use cases for it? What industries are they in? The reality is we could have sliced it any way we wanted, and we probably could sell other services on top of it. And so it's not like, the step-by-step is more just like, be willing to have a point of view, do some of the work, like get in there, and then find a way to show it. And that's the most important thing. Turn it into an asset of some sorts, because if it's not, it's too squishy, and you show up, and I think of it this way. If I showed up and was like, hey, I looked at all the sites of like 300 all your competitors, like, great, that's nice. But when I give it to them, they're going to go, oh my gosh, like, what is this? Like, why are you? And then they have questions. Why are you building this? What's coming next? And so you've got it. That's even in our own business, picking homepages, tying things to an asset, incredibly powerful. And then the last thing I'll say, just on these asset things of like, what do I pick? How do I get specific? The reality is, all roads lead back to strategy. And Anthony really gets the credit here for this. As you guys know, my background's like pretty generalist. And so when we were niching down, it was pretty uncomfortable for me. I felt like, oh no, like, I could do so much more than just positioning or like just homepages. Like, is this really it? The reality is like, by picking homepages, I now get to have the most strategic conversations with founders every day, even though we're just going to do a homepage at the end. And the truth is, all assets lead there, right? Like, even technical, let's say I was like enterprise architect. It's like, okay, I could just do architect diagrams. Those diagrams still need to incorporate how the business works. So even those like non-business, non-marketing things still could walk their way all the way back up to like, how are we making decisions about product in relation to the market? And so it doesn't even matter what you pick, but no one's willing to pick. It's like the biggest blocker and irony for all these fractional people that want to get into the work or be a product marketer. And I think it's just like, they're afraid of picking, but the power is in picking. The power is in specialty. And so I'll pause.
All right, putting on my shoulder pads for a second round. That is, and I think, we internally have talked about that amongst ourselves, and also how we view just business as it relates to B2B. And I think you put it very, very well, is the power is in picking, not being a jack of all trades type deal. I love that.
Yep. Coming from a jack of all trades, right? Like, listeners, like, I was the jack of all trades.
OG Jack.
I know the pain. It's awful. You're like ultra employable and then ultra unemployable at the same time. And like, it's really hard to market yourself because your value is like, I could be the CEO. It's like, that's great. No one's going to give you that role. So what are you going to do? Like, that was me for 10 or 15 years, right? And so like, once you pick and are willing to like humble yourself and do one thing, it's so counterintuitive, but so funny. Then all those generalist skills will come out. Like, I can talk about sales, I can talk about product, I can talk about engineering when they come up, and like, my credibility's better. And so it's like, it'll be a differentiator for you, but only when you're willing to pick. And like, that is like the ultimate, even like microcosm for even the startups we work with. Be known for one really good thing. It'll get you those conversations, and then you can expand from there and, be the jack of all trades of sorts. And so that's my hill I'm willing to die on 100%.
It's such the best of both worlds as well, because you get to use those generalist skills as let's get shit done, but you still get back to that strategy aspect that we've been chasing with its strategy, but up to a level so deep that it's 100% called a differentiation, right? It's not product marketing anymore. It's homepage positioning and messaging up to a point that it's very difficult to compete against because you have such a deep level of understanding and you've been testing things out as well. I think it's super inspiring, especially as you have 3 solo PMMs on fractional PMMs on the call.
Just pick, guys. That's my message.
We'll see us soon doing that too. I'm like, those are the questions of mine. I need further questions here for Rob. Like, this is
quickly on us on LinkedIn. And we keep dodging the question. I don't know how long we can dodge it without him taking a swipe. I need an answer.
You're in the content calendar. What if I told you that? No, I'm just kidding. We don't even have a calendar to be from the hip with our content.
It's the same thing with our account.
I'll be out of
He keeps asking us, what is marketing? And as we're still trying to figure that out ourselves, I'd love to know, like, from your perspective, how you would position marketing if you were doing a positioning exercise.
You want to know the real answer? Is I wouldn't. To be point blank. Here's the thing. It's so funny. This is like timely because I'm literally working with a group right now and they are almost trying to reposition marketing. Like they're trying to here's what marketing is going to look like, all these shifts. It's too freaking broad, right? Like this is all comes back to specificity because you imagine somebody raising their hand going, I'm a marketer. And it's like, oh, great. Well, tell me what you do. And the person goes, I write white papers for around surgical procedures. So to get the attention of doctors. Like, okay. And then the other person goes, I'm a marketer. Great. What do you do? It's like, I run TikTok ads to sell vape pens. It's like, oh, they're both marketers. They're both doing marketing, but those are two radically different things, right? And so like positioning marketing, like I'm not sure it can be done. And so like when it'll actually happen in our process when people come in and they're like, we have a marketing platform. And they're like, well, what would we do on your platform? They're like, do marketing. Like, well, that's your use case. And like, here's your hero, like a new way to do marketing. But guess what? Now we're stuck because I can't position you. It's like, so we got to get specific. That's my first answer. And like the surface area of marketing is just it's too much, right? And so you got to pull those levers of like, who's doing the marketing? What kind of marketing are they doing? And so like without those, unpositionable is where I'm at. Non-answer, a refusal.
So it sounds
So you're
like
telling us
product
that
marketing.
Legitimately crying because it's so true.
Yeah.
Marketing's too everywhere.
And where we see it get to the extreme is also like Anthony did this. I think he was on a webinar roasting, maybe it was Clary, and instead of do revenue, like run revenue. It's like, of course, everyone wants to get to that level. It's like, imagine if we own the positioning of run revenue or do marketing. It's like, it's an unattainable positioning because it's too freaking broad. It's wild.
You nailed it. And like,
so it sounds like you're saying that product marketers aren't marketers then in your explanation implicitly.
It's you got a little better, right? But then even this whole conversation, what's a product marketer, right? And now we get into context in the questions where we've got someone over here at an enterprise who's doing decks. You got, me and Anthony over here that are doing homepages and positioning strategies. Like the surface area of these things is really huge and context matters. And there's always going to be that tension. And this is where I think just baking this into a positioning thing for founders where they get really stuck is they like trick themselves into thinking that's specific enough. And they buy their vision of their product of like, no, it can be used for all these things when that's the very thing that's going to prevent them from actually making a dent. And what's happening is like these markets, especially B2B markets, they're wildly fragmented because people are just in different situations, in different contexts, using different tools. And so like you can't show up in the same way to everyone. And like it's all about getting that layer of specificity down. And many folks just aren't willing to do it, to be honest.
I got one quick question. I hope it's simple. Do you view positioning a product like software, right, any different than a service offering?
Good question. In general, no. Where it gets a little tricky is when they're combined. And then you just got to be upfront of like, yeah, this is a product that has combined services and combined product components. But the fundamentals are the same. You got to tell people what it is. You got to tell people how it works. And you got to say who it's for. foundationally. And so of the 300 companies we've worked with, I'd say maybe 50 of them, 30 to 50 of them are service-based companies. Some of them even like solopreneurs. We worked with like Morgan Ingram and Devin Reed and helping them like sort things out. And like the fundamentals are still the same, very much how like we have to do our own positioning. The nuances, and it's mostly tied into model, is just the way you explain it versus like, you can do this and we will do this for you. Like you just got to be really clear on those pieces, and it gets a little wishy-washy when it's done with you / for you, and you just got to like sharpen that. But from a positioning standpoint, very, in our view at least, like they are the same thing from a foundations and fundamentals point of view.
Awesome.
I have one quick follow-up question that came to mind. In context, we did ask April Dunford the same question, so know that context, because I know you guys were messaging back and forth on LinkedIn.
I was just chatting with her, maybe Wednesday. We had a nice chat, so I'm really curious about the question.
Okay, so and this is not going to compare, not a comparison of who's better, but here's the question. You got a SaaS organization that comes up to you and says, "Hey, like we have a platform. And we want to build a platform, and we need platform messaging and positioning." With what you mentioned before, is saying like, "Hey, a lot of the SaaS market is disjointed." What is your guidance to an organization that wants to build a platform, but in the reality, it's just 3 different products they're cobbling together?
Yep, I love this question. We probably bump into this. We probably had 30 clients that maybe fall into this bucket of platform. So real quick, our definition of platform is effectively, it's usually it's a tool that lets you build other tools effectively, is what we usually see. It's like this building block. You think of like the Lego set, like the collection of Legos. That's a platform. And so like the big one that comes to mind is Airtable. It's like, Airtable, you can build stuff and organize information. It's like, that's what it does, but you could build a CRM, you can build a content calendar, you can build all these things. And so like those are where the vertical markets start to come in. And so how do you position a platform? The one way, if you're going to stay broad of like build stuff, is effectively you got to verticalize in some way, shape, or form. Who would use this freaking thing? And the more specific, the better. You have to almost accommodate for how broad that specific thing is. Usually, though, even with these platforms, you have to simulate sub positions. And I think this is a big misunderstanding in general about positioning. A lot of founders and groups will show up to us and they'll say, "Help us position. We're looking for universal positioning and messaging that really encapsulates us." And whenever that happens, we just shoot up the red flare and we're like, wait, let's be really clear. There is no such thing as a universal set of positioning and messaging. Because what happens, even think of like salespeople, they are dynamically positioning for every contact they have. And so they'll pitch the product in all these different ways. And that's naturally what's going to happen to match the complexities that are in the market, because they're all different. And so when you start to position these platforms, you got to start to carve out small niches and then sequence them. One of the founders of Airtable actually talked about this, where they like for a while, they stayed in the broad organize information, build stuff, better spreadsheet, easier to use database. And they got some early adopters. But then really they regret it now. They spent 3 or 4 years just in that mode. And their founder said, "I wish we would have gone specific faster in picking out those sub markets and sub use cases for the platform." And the one in particular that they brought up, I think there was 2. One was around content calendar and creation schedules. And another was around like, they were getting tons of groups of like videographers, like setting up their cadence for like how they were tracking client projects. And over time, they then solve for each of those. And so like if you go to Airtable today, they're literally a collection of dozens, if not hundreds, of positioning and messaging sets for all these different sub-markets. And sometimes you have to build all those. Other times you can do it via community. Like Notion's a good example. They literally, through community-led growth, they got early adopters super stoked about all the things you could do. They let them build all the templates and frameworks of like, here's how you take notes in class, and like, here's how you set up a marketing strategy doc. And like, here we are now, they've got all these pieces. And so long-winded way of saying, when it comes to platform messaging, you really can't do a lot of positioning if you're not willing to get specific. You can do explaining at a high level, and you have to then start thinking about sub-market positioning. At least that's how we would approach it. And now I'm super curious how April answered that, but that's truly how we would approach it with the clients that come to us, and if we were running a platform company ourselves. Oh, it's great.
I feel like I learned so much in that episode, just in terms of the origin story, but also like I relate very much to having a generalist background and kind of seeing that come to fruition up until, going very niche, very deep down. So yeah, I feel like it's a very kick-ass one. Where can people learn more about you? Where can people find more about you, Rob?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, pretty much exclusively LinkedIn. We may move to some other platforms. So, hey, Rob K on LinkedIn, or just go right to fletchpmm.com. Check us out. Feel free to send me or my co-founder, Anthony Pierri, a DM. We'll get back to you as soon as we can, but we'd love to have a meeting. And again, you're going to keep helping us iterate on the process when we meet as well. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions around positioning and messaging, or really just early stage go-to-market in general.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Rob, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you again for joining us.
Dude, this was fun, man. You guys do it in such a way. I told Gab before you guys both jumped in. It's like the fact that there's multiple of you, it like breaks kind of the ice of like, oh, we get stuck. What I love is you let us like kind of meander into different areas that we maybe wouldn't have talked about. And so, we've been doing a handful of these, and sometimes you get some real rough ones. I can honestly say, probably the most fun I've had just in general, and like Ace as well. And so I like what you guys are building. And so
Amazing.
Kudos on that. If I could support you guys, just let me know how. This was a blast.
Thank you.
So, you touched me up a little bit, Rob. I appreciate that.
Don't get soft on me over there. We're in this together. Where are you guys based? So I know Gab's in Canada. Zach and Eric, where are you guys at? And where in Canada are you at, Gab?
I'm in Quebec City, so the French part of Canada.
I'm in San Diego right now. I'm in Minneapolis visiting family.
Right on.
I'm in what I call Pennsyltucky, but central Pennsylvania.
Pennsyltucky.
I hate everything Pennsylvania. Steelers, Eagles.
Okay.
Not about it.
How's that happen?
I'm just a rebel, dude. Like, yeah, you put me here and I'm naturally bound to just say, yeah, all your teams suck. I'm rooting for Red Sox, LA Rams, Michigan Wolverines, and I used to be a Laker fan until LeBron got there. So now I'm just a straggler. I'm a Drifter fan, but I'm very loyal. So once I find one, I stick until there's a catastrophic event like Bron James.
You can't say the end, like cut the last part. I'm loyal unless something bad happens, and I'm
no. It has to be catastrophic, like LeBron James getting traded to the team. As a Rams fan,
I welcomed him back.
It's rough. It's rough out here.
Yeah.
But,
nice. Well, you guys have to let me know if you ever make it to Austin. We'll have to grab a drink or some food or something.
Dude, I didn't know you were down there, but yes, next time I'm down there for sure. And thanks for coming on. And actually, because we always do this, we got to do a closeout. So thank you everyone for coming to another episode of We're Not
Marketers.
Thank you for listening to We're Not Marketers. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, review our podcast, and share this episode with other PMMs. Thanks again, and see you soon.